We're here at the Parliament of the World's Religions here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we have with us today Lori Fazzino. Lori.
Hello.
It's good to see you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out of your busy schedule and sitting down and having a chat with me.
I'm excited to have a chat with you, Darrell. Thank you for having me.
Lori is on faculty. You're going to be teaching with the MIFA program. This coming up year, you're going to teach the Power and Privilege course with us. Are you excited about it?
I'm extremely excited about the Power and Privilege course.
Yeah.
I think scholars have done a pretty poor job of talking about these issues, the issues of power and privilege. Scholars have traditionally set up the idea of privilege, in a way that creates this dichotomy of us versus them.
Yes.
Right? Talking about male privilege and white privilege and Christian privilege, rather than taking, I think, more of a multidimensional approach and talking about race privilege and religious privilege. And when you set up that dichotomy, and you create that us versus them, you automatically have defenses.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so if you want to, let's say, talk to a white male, an educated, affluent white male, arguably the most privileged sort of demographic in the United States, and you start talking about all their male privilege and the way that, that they're oppressing different demographics, they're not going to be, wanting to
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's already a resistance. If we talk about the fact that we all have varying levels of privilege, so I have race privilege, but I don't have gender privilege in terms of being a woman. I do have cisgender privilege because I do.
Yeah, you talk about that cisgender privilege.
Exactly.
Get into that a little bit. Unpack that a little bit.
Cisgender is just doing your gender roles, doing your gender identity the way that these categories are sort of set up. And so I'm wearing makeup today. Right, okay. I did try and look, dressed well.
I was thinking about putting a little bit on too because I'm on camera today.
So camera would be fine, right? But just out, if you were sporting the guy liner, right, not so much.
Okay.
But so I look like a woman, and so really, when we're talking about cisgender, that's usually set up opposed to trans folk, right? So I have cisgender privilege, but I don't necessarily have gender privilege if we're talking about male-female, right, relations.
Well, this is kind of interesting because this conversation, traditionally and historically, has been left out of the interfaith community, the interfaith conversation. We've generally spent our time and our days feeling good around one another. I often say singing Kumbaya, eating hummus, pita bread, feeling good, sharing, and there is a place for that.
Absolutely.
No doubt. But it appears that some of the issues that we are confronted with today are great and also grave and require many of us who are interfaith practitioners and interfaith leaders to be out front and center, to deal with these issues, to stand up for our lesbian, gay, bi, transgender brothers and sisters, out in the public sphere, to promote social justice, to ensure that there is a living wage, in place for all. So, just tell me a little bit more about your role in the interfaith movement. How did you, learn about interfaith? What was your experience?
Well, my first experience with Interfaith was when we met in D.C. About a year ago.
Yeah, the president's
fourth annual
president's initiative on
community
interfaith
service and campus. It's a really long
campus challenge.
Right. So I do strategy consultant for the National Secular Student Alliance.
Okay.
This is an educational nonprofit organization that plants different groups, secular groups, on college campuses and high school campuses. And I was asked to develop a workshop on religious privilege, or originally I was asked to develop a workshop on Christian privilege. And when I was unpacking this issue of privilege, I said, I don't want to have this conversation. We may live in a secular democracy, but this is very much a theonormative culture in the United States.
I like that. Okay.
And so we need to really talk about religious privilege. And so I developed this workshop and attended the event in Washington, D.C. at the George Washington University.
The George Washington, yep.
And I'm not going to lie to you, Darrell. I was quite nervous because I identify as atheist and humanist.
Okay.
My counterpart, Liz Lydell from the Secular Student Alliance, also atheist, and humanist. And we were going to deliver this workshop to largely, a room full of religious people. Right. And the stigma that atheists still experience in the United States, it was just. It was first of all a delicate topic, right? Because we didn't want to create those barriers and that resistance. Right. But there was that extra layer of the fact that now it's being talked about by atheists. Yeah. But I am happy to say that it, super receptive. Everybody really got it, and it was great. And just from that experience, I wanted to be more involved with interfaith.
See, that's the one thing that, it's hard for me to really comprehend. Not your story, but the fact that someone really owns interfaith. And over the last, let's just say, century in this country alone, interfaith work has been dominated by Christianity and Christian practitioners. There's nothing wrong with engaging the street and putting faith into action, but when you push out people from different belief traditions, and I even consider, and we've gone back and forth from the term secular, but brothers and sisters who are theists, non-theists, secular humanists, and what have you, there's no right that anyone holds to push anyone out of the conversation. Now, we can get into a conversation around the comparative nature between religion and beliefs that exist, but how long should we stay in that conversation? Really not that long.
Well, and if you think about it, atheists have been largely absent from this conversation.
That's it.
Chris Stedman's work in Fatheist, who that was another, sort of another introduction I had to interfaith work, and he's really pushed the envelope with that and taken a lot of slack just within the secular movement.
Yes.
So if you think about it, interfaith, just the name, interfaith, right? Atheist humanists, we don't have a faith, and so just the name interfaith is exclusionary. Interreligious, that's exclusionary.
Oh, very exclusionary.
So there's all sorts of issues around language when you're thinking about who's included, who's excluded, and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're doing at CLU. We launched the President's Committee on Interfaith Action back in July, and one of the first questions that we put to the 30 members, we said, hey, listen, we want to redefine the term interfaith. What is interfaith in the 21st century? And looking at some of the key issues over the next, I would probably say, 5 years, moving toward 2020, what are some of these key issues going to be? And how should interfaith, as we define it, apply? And one of the things that we had a chance to come up with, we said, hey, listen, interfaith is just not about the Abrahamic faiths interacting with one another. It is a universal integration of people and ideas, belief systems. And as we identified those belief systems, there were theists, non-theists, secular humanists, individuals who don't identify with a traditional religious group or organization, but they're putting their wisdom to work in the world for good. Even though it's a part of our tagline, that's what they're doing. And, opening up this interbelief conversation, this interthought conversation is extremely important, because the limitations around what interfaith activity used to be has really pushed a lot of people away, good people away around the world, just not in this country, but around the world. And largely it's due to privilege held by, in some circles, Christians in particular.
Well, I mean, the Christians do make up the dominant religion in the United States.
Absolutely.
So I mean, you can understand, why Christians have sort of dominated this conversation. But I think there's some interesting challenges that the interfaith movement will be facing in the next couple of years. And you mentioned people unaffiliated with any particular, now these people are not the rise of the nuns, right? N-O-N-E-S.
Yeah.
I love the play on words.
Yeah, that term,
I love it. I really do. But these aren't people that are necessarily identifying as atheist agnostic, right? These are people that are just outside of religious institution, right? And so you have, how do you reach this group, right? How do you reach the millennials where they're seemingly indifferent toward religion, right? I think the key is to figure out what the goals of interfaith work should be, and then to work backwards from there, right? If the goals are peace, right, and conflict elimination, right? You want to just get rid of the conflict. You want to establish a peace. You just want to be there for, and work toward a greater humanity. Yeah,
that common goal. Yeah.
That's anybody. Yeah. Anybody can do that, independent of your faith, your religion, your belief system, your non-belief system. Anybody could do that. But if those are not the goals, right? And I know so much of interfaith work is focused on dialogue. Right? And not that dialogue isn't isn't effective and beneficial.
Yeah.
But for example, I'm on a panel that's happening this Sunday on having these conversations between believers and non-believers, and what we're talking about is why these dialogues are important,
right.
but then how do you move beyond the dialogue?
Oh.
Right, and so another challenge I think to interfaith work would be people in our own traditions that are very vocal against interfaith work for whatever reason, whether or not it's somebody who believes that their faith tradition has the truth and therefore like we shouldn't be inclusive, or if it's non-believers that are just that want to eradicate religion, and,
right.
and sadly there are right. those out there. We're arguing, my partner Mel Littman and I, we're arguing from the humanist perspective that moving beyond dialogue for interfaith work is dialogue,
right.
but it's a different type of dialogue. It's not that we're not dialoguing, just in the
with
interfaith, but we need to go back into our own communities and have these difficult dialogues, these difficult conversations with, for me it would be people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, who are really opposed, or the more anti-theist strands, and say, hey, we get it, you don't want to do it, but shh, can you please be quiet, because some of us do want to do this work, and we're exercising our autonomy in choosing to do this work. So you can choose not to do it, but can you just kind of be a little bit quiet
this
about
is kind of cutting edge. No, it's kind of cutting edge because the traditional trend of Richard Dawkins and many of the atheist-led conversations that are taking place around science and religion have sought to dominate over the last, I'd probably say, 10, 15 years or so. And I'm seeing a new voice, a new strand that's coming up. And you'll be presenting with Mel Littman, right?
That's correct.
So this is good because I'll have a chance to talk with Mel tomorrow. But I want to ask this question: why is it so hard to move beyond the dialogue? Because we can sit and just chat about ourselves all day long, but outside the door, there are major issues. Issues around ensuring that there's clean water, stopping human trafficking, stopping religious extremism. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, environmental issues, climate change. And these are roles. These roles are cropping up. And these are good roles where interfaith practitioners could really make a difference in the world by focusing on these issues and partnering with non-government organizations, non-profits, intergovernmental organizations, and even governments in particular to promote peace, justice, social justice in the world.
Yeah, so why is it so hard to move beyond the dialogue? That's a very large question, and there's not one simple answer. I can talk about the fact that we, in the United States, it's very individualistic. Like individualism is a strong American value, and so raising awareness and raising consciousness, which is what most of the social movements of the 20th century and the latter 20th century have been about, right? I like to call this sort of all moral talk and no moral action.
Oh, I like that. You have a lot of little play on words.
I certainly do.
Linguistic situations.
So when we're talking about it, we get to feel good about ourselves, but it also lets us sort of, kind of shuck that responsibility, right? We talk about doing something. Clearly we care, right? But do we actually go and do it? And so there's less movement to going and doing it. So I can talk about individualism. I can talk about what it requires in the United States and many across the globe really to live the good life, and how our families today really do require a two-income sort of household. And so there's only so much time, and even in that there's so much attention on leisure culture and taking this break and going on vacation. And so once you've worked your 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week, right? And then you've managed to take your beautiful wife, or your handsome husband, and your 2.5 kids on the vacation that you so rightly deserve because you're working all that time. Really, where's the time left over, right? I can talk about commitment and voluntary organizations and how we don't belong to just one community anymore, and how we've got commitments, albeit very loose ones, in several different communities. I can talk about this from the atheist perspective and kind of key in on some of my own research regarding what I'm calling symbolic trauma and social pain, which is a concept that you'll find in the sociology, and really look at why white atheists and some humanists might be resistant toward moving beyond these dialogues or even engaging in these dialogues, doing this work, even working with theists, and the hurt and trauma that comes from being in religion and deconverting and living in a theonormative culture where they are really, atheists and non-believers really are cast outside the civic boundaries of moral inclusion.
Right. Is it the fact that when we move beyond the dialogue and move into that space of true sharing, that we have to take on just a little bit of the other person? We have to trade, in a sense. I have to take on not necessarily your thoughts and your ideas, but I have to see you as human. I have to enter into your space a little bit. And maybe for some who are a part of the Dawkins, team, in a sense, maybe they don't wish to move into that space and share those conversations. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, no, I think Dawkins and that I call him Dawkins and his cronies, right? That sort of anti-theist group.
Dawkins and Co.
Right? Yeah. There's so much hurt there.
Yeah.
Right? And whether or not anti-theists sort of want to admit that, there's a fair amount of research that talks about the emotional trauma of being in religion, of leaving religion, of watching injustices done in the name of religion, and really kind of religion sort of being treated with kid gloves and getting a pass. Right? So there's sort of that hurt. But there's also, for non-believers and believers alike, engaging and moving past and really looking one another in the eye, right? There's a humility there. And one has to be really willing to say, you know what, I could be wrong.
Right.
And that's not, our belief systems really, they don't really operate that way, right? And so, and on both sides, not just believers, but, whether or not God's, the supernatural exists, that's not an empirical question, that's a metaphysical question. And so, on our side, you have to be willing to say, you know what, probability, but I can be wrong. And by adopting that humility, which I think so many of us have a hard time doing, and it's not really encouraged in so many of our faith communities and non-belief communities, right? How do we even do that?
Wow.
What does that even mean? What does that mean for, sort of your ontological understanding? And this is a risk society, right? So we don't have a lot of ontological security, and there's so many different, sort of existential concerns that I just wonder if people have the mental toughness necessary to sort of take on that humility, be able to admit that they could be wrong, and enough self-reflection and insight to say, you know what, I am hurting here, but I'm not going to project that onto these great people that want to end hunger, or want to go build bridges.
I see interfaith work is hard work.
It's very hard work.
It's hard work, and it's about changing lives and saving lives.
Absolutely. It is.
Well, Lori Fazzino, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Darrell.
Broadcasting live from the Parliament of the World's Religions.
Parliament.
All right, great.
Thank you.
See you around.